police force knows what they're up against and what they're doing. That's what everyone thinks. They're trained to be logical and professional in dire situations like crimes, and their job is to do everything they can to prevent the crimes, find evidence, take perpetrators to jail, and give the victims' families justice and closure. But what happens when the very police force you put your trust in topples everything over with one wrong decision? In the sad and unnecessarily dragged out case of Nona Dirksmeyer, a 19-year-old beauty queen who was found lifeless in her own home, the police turned out to be negligent and incompetent and wasted so much time running after someone who they were certain was the perpetrator, all while missing the obvious signs that were there all along. Welcome to True Crime Stories. I'm your host and fellow armchair detective, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So if you're into that kind of thing, then hit that subscribe button. It's free and it just keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. Nona Carol Dirksmeyer was born on December 26th of 1985 in Zachary, Louisiana, to her parents, Paul and Carol Dirksmeyer. Later, the Dirksmeyer family moved to Russellville, Arkansas, and called it their home. Her dad was in the military, and her mom was a nurse. Coming from a fairly big family, she had 4 brothers and 1 sister, and all of them were very close. Nona later attended Dover High School, from where she graduated in 2004. But for Nona and her family, grief and trauma found their way into their lives on August 20th of 1996, when Nona was just 10 years old. That was the day that Nona's dad, Paul, passed away, and it was a very hard time for the family. But soon after his passing, Nona was in high school, and she confided in her mom about a very terrifying secret that she'd kept locked up for years. See, her father's passing was an escape for Nona. Why? Well, because it turned out that the person who was supposed to be Nona's protector was a monster in reality. Tragically, Nona was subjected to abuse of every kind by her father, and it goes without saying that hearing such a thing, it's just disgusting. But thankfully, Nona found a way out of this cycle at a very young age, but that doesn't make it any less traumatic, because now not only did Nona have to live with the memories and the guilt of the trauma, but now she had to grow up without her father as well. When she finally confided in her mom, thankfully Carol believed her, but there was nothing she could do because the perpetrator, her husband, had passed away and he couldn't face the consequences of his actions, at least not in this lifetime. This trauma also left Nona with terrible emotional scars. She was an amazing young girl, but was suffering from depression from a very young age. Nona was a shy and sweet kid, but her circle of friends was pretty small, and she wasn't just an open book to the people who met her. But those who knew Nona were her ride or die, and one of them was her best friend since kindergarten, Kevin Jones. Kevin was the type of best friend everyone wants. He was very caring and gentle, and was protective of Nona too. The two lived close to each other and were basically inseparable growing up. They'd always do things together, plan activities, and just enjoy each other's company. Kevin was also one of the very few people who knew about the abuse that Nona endured, and instead of leaving her alone to sort it out, he stuck with her through everything. Even though Nona was difficult at times, Kevin had immense patience and believed that Nona would make it through. He was there for her when she suffered from her terrible bouts of depression, and their friendship only solidified with time. So much so that the two started dating, which was just perfect. If anyone saw Nona and Kevin, they knew that they were meant for each other. Nona's other friends also encouraged her to break out of her shell. Not that there's anything wrong with keeping to yourself, but Nona's friends knew that she was born to do amazing things, and she just needed that little push. Eventually, this little push led to Nona performing in beauty pageants. She participated in several local beauty competitions and won multiple awards. She was crowned Miss Petit Jean Valley in 2005 and went on to compete in the Miss Arkansas pageant in that same year. Nona also channeled her emotional hurt into something productive, and she took part in a lot of volunteer work for women who suffered from abuse or violence. She was also very religious, and not only did she sing in her congregation's choir, but she was also a member of the First Christian Church and the Big Brothers and Big Sisters organization. When it came to college, Nona and Kevin both enrolled at Arkansas Tech University. Nona, wanting to use her musical talent as a potential career path, chose music education as her major. College was the time for Nona to spread her wings, and she decided to rent an apartment near campus. See, Nona's mom, Carol, had remarried after Paul's passing. And even though Nona's stepdad was 100 times better than the monster that was her biological father, he was still strict, and everyone in the house had to follow his rules. The typical come home early, having a curfew, all that kind of stuff. Well, Nona didn't want to do that since she was in college, and she wanted independence, and rightfully so. This was why she moved into her apartment in Russellville, Arkansas. But within just a year, Kevin had some unexpected news for Nona. See, Kevin had decided to change universities, and now he was moving an hour and a half away from Nona. The couple had been in a relationship for about 5 years now, and this was the first time that they'd be trying the whole long-distance thing. While it wasn't ideal, Kevin hoped that his and Nona's love for each other was stronger than the distance, and that they would make it work. They communicated regularly, kept each other in the loop of things, and would meet whenever they got the time. Before long, December of 2005 rolled around, and the air was thick with the cheery holiday spirit. But this was also the tragic time when something terrifying happened to Nona. That too, inside the very place that she called home. December 15th of 2005 was the day when Kevin and Nona had plans to meet. They were finally free for the holidays and couldn't wait to spend time together. On that same day at around 9 a.m., Nona texted Kevin in the morning, wishing him a good day, and that was tragically the last time he ever heard from Nona. As time went on, Kevin was looking forward to Nona's call, but he never got one. He started to get worried and called and texted Nona constantly. At one point, out of desperation, Kevin texted Nona saying, quote, "You alive?" As soon as Kevin got free from his errands, he immediately called his friend Ryan, who worked as a delivery guy, and asked if he could go check up on Nona. Ryan reached Nona's apartment, and he was surprised to see her car in the parking lot. From the windows, the lights of the house were still on, but when he rang the doorbell, no one answered. Kevin had a really bad feeling about this, and he asked his mom to accompany him to Nona's apartment. Kevin usually had a key to her apartment, but unfortunately he left it at home at that time. So he had no choice but to go through the back sliding doors. Now, for context, the sliding doors were usually secured shut from the inside. Some sources say that they had the type of security fence of sorts, and this was something Nona specifically asked for because there were times when she was home alone and she was scared for her safety. Kevin expected the security bars to be there, but as the trio rounded off to the back, there was nothing on the back sliding doors. This was immediately alarming for Kevin because Nona would never have taken the security fence down, especially if she was home alone. So why was it removed? As soon as Kevin entered the apartment, he saw something red on the blinds, and you can probably guess what it was. But as he went up to Nona's bedroom, he was met with a horrific scene. 19-year-old Nona lay lifeless and cold on the floor, and it was a gruesome mess. Kevin, completely distraught and acting on impulse, took a now passed Nona into his arms and was sobbing uncontrollably. This was his girlfriend of 5 years, and now she was lying there lifeless and exposed for who knows how long. Kevin's mom, Janice, immediately called the police, and as soon as investigators and emergency services arrived, the house was taped off, and the police, at first glance, knew that the attack on Nona was horrific. A table lamp and a knife were used to viciously attack Nona. There was also a discarded contraceptive wrapper on the floor and one single fingerprint on the lamp. Nona's autopsy results showed that her time of death was anywhere between 10:30 a.m. and 1 p.m. But this was where the investigators made a grave mistake. They did not inspect the crime scene thoroughly. They didn't take samples from the blinds, and they didn't check the apartment for shoe prints. Worse yet, they never expanded the inspection from the bedroom where Nona was found. But why would they do this? Well, it's because they already had their eyes set on one particular person: Kevin. As soon as the detectives stepped foot into the apartment and saw Kevin, they knew they had their guy. First of all, they saw Kevin's clothes covered in Nona's blood, because if you remember, he hugged her and cried as soon as he discovered her. Well, the investigators came to the conclusion that he had done this on purpose to hide any evidence of the crime on his clothes. This, to them, was the only logical explanation. But this was just the start, though. The police also thought that it was suspicious of Kevin to show up at Nona's apartment with his mom and friend. According to the police, Kevin had thought ahead and brought people with him so that they could provide him an alibi. Also, remember the text that Kevin sent Nona, asking if she was alive? Well, the investigators held on to this information like their job was on the line and accused Kevin of fatally attacking Nona. Now, if this sounds totally ridiculous to you, you're not alone. But there's more. The detectives took 19-year-old Kevin to the police station and grilled him with questions, even forcing him to confess to the crime. During the interrogation, Kevin was alone in the room, and when it dawned on him that he was a suspect in his girlfriend's passing, he punched a chair in sheer panic and frustration, and this was all caught on camera. Well, when the investigators saw this, they automatically pinned Kevin as a closet abusive man, and because of his behavior, he was all the more likely to attack and tragically end Nona's life, at least in their eyes. Keep in mind that Kevin was without a lawyer, and he was being pressured to confess. At one point, Kevin was forced to take a polygraph test, and get this, he failed. But here's the kicker. The person reading the test results was not even a certified specialist. He was a rookie cop, so these results were completely useless to begin with. But if that doesn't make you want to pull your hair out, then this next bit will. The detectives had zero evidence against Kevin. From the looks of the crime, Nona had fought for her life, and it meant that the attacker probably had scratches, bruises, and injuries on their body as well. But Kevin didn't show any signs of this. At one point in the investigation, they even pinned Kevin as a jealous and angry boyfriend who wanted to get back at Nona. Now, this part may leave you a bit confused, but again, you're not alone in feeling this way. See, the context was that when the investigators talked to Nona's friends, they found out that she had supposedly been seeing another guy behind Kevin's back. When the police checked the man's alibi, it was airtight, and he was ruled out as a suspect. But the investigators went on to believe that this was the motive for Kevin. According to the police, when Kevin found out about Nona messing around on him, he apparently confronted her and bludgeoned her to death. The police, with this information, basically forced Kevin to confess. But how did they do that? Well, the detectives told Kevin that everyone in his and Nona's family believed he was the wrongdoer. The investigators were seriously misleading the investigation and trying to pin the crime on Kevin just so they could close the case. Kevin was left miserable and even missed Nona's funeral service, which he helped to organize because the police held him at the police station for so long. This went on for months, and if you thought that was crazy, well, it's nowhere near the end. In March of 2006, almost 3 months after Nona's passing, the investigators arrested and charged Kevin officially with her murder. Their only evidence was a fingerprint on the lamp's light bulb that belonged to Kevin. The detectives believed that this single fingerprint on the murder weapon was enough to convict him of the crime. In all fairness, Kevin did touch the lamp while he held Nona in his arms, and that's likely the reason why his fingerprint was on the light bulb. But was that enough for the investigators to convict him for murder? Well, that would soon be found out. The trial was held in another jurisdiction because everyone knew about the investigation and they were scared that the jurors might deliver the wrong verdict under the influence of hearsay. The prosecution argued that Kevin was the one to murder Nona because his phone was turned off from 10:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. and that the murder weapon had his fingerprint on it. But just the one, though. The defense, on the other hand, presented witnesses that corroborated Kevin's alibi. One of them was Kevin's grandmother, who saw him at a gas station and gave him money to buy something to eat. Another witness saw Kevin having lunch between 12:30 and 1 p.m. This was confirmed by CCTV footage as well. So Kevin couldn't have possibly committed the crime in such a short span of time. He wasn't anywhere near Nona's house at the time. The defense also put a spotlight on the blunders in the investigation. According to the defense, the police did check the unknown fingerprints, but the database yielded no results. Those were possibly the fingerprints of the actual perpetrator. Moreover, the investigators initially didn't find any DNA on the contraceptive wrapper, but when the lawyers demanded a retest, traces of unknown male DNA were found, and they did not belong to Kevin. Also, a medical examiner shared an interesting fact about Nona's body position. According to him, the body was initially on its back, but after some time it was turned face down. This suggested that someone took advantage of Nona, likely after she had lost her life. Now, you may not believe it, but Kevin's trial lasted over a year. When the jury deliberated and came back with a verdict, Kevin was luckily found not guilty due to an obvious lack of evidence, and he was acquitted. Even though Kevin was relieved, what was so devastating was that there was a major chunk of people who still believed, just like the police, that he was responsible. Can you imagine how Kevin must have felt? Not only did he find his girlfriend of 5 years murdered, but he was being painted as the killer by the police. And some people believed it. It was all because of serious errors, lack of professionalism, and incompetence in the police force. And they were so close to convicting an innocent man for Nona's passing. Now that Kevin was no longer a suspect, the investigators were back at the desk, and this time they had lawyers behind them directing on what to do. The DNA found on the contraceptive packaging was tested against all the DNA of the men who'd interacted with Nona, but the results were inconclusive. That was until September of 2007 when they finally got a break in the case. A man named Gary Dunn was arrested for robbery. But what did that have to do with Nona's attack? Well, the DNA found at Nona's crime scene matched Gary's. Not only this, but Gary also lived in the same apartment complex as Nona, and initially he was even a suspect in Nona's investigation. But because of the police's laser focus in the wrong direction, he was ruled out. To make matters worse, Gary was also accused and convicted of attacking another woman. Also, his alibi on the day of Nona's attack was never checked. According to Gary, he was out shopping with his mother. And remember this because it'll come back up later. The detectives make one huge mistake after another in this investigation, and it was time for them to redeem themselves. Finally, it clicked for the police, and Gary was brought in for questioning. When he took a polygraph test, though, he passed. But get this test was yet again conducted by someone who was not licensed to read polygraph results. You can't make this stuff up. When the investigators finally looked into Gary's alibi, lo and behold, it turned out to be false. Well, Gary did go shopping with his mom, but it was 2 days before Nona's attack. Gary actually had shown shopping receipts to the police when he was initially questioned as a suspect back in 2005. But the investigators either didn't notice the dates were wrong, or they didn't even look at the receipts. If only the detectives had looked a little more closely and paid attention to Gary's alibi instead of grilling and pressuring poor Kevin to confess to the crime, this case could have been solved years earlier. To add to the suspicion, the unknown fingerprints on the lamp matched that of Gary's. But there was a problem. It was not a 100% match, because it had now been so long since the murder that the evidence had deteriorated. And the investigators also failed to retrieve fingerprints and DNA within the first few hours of the crime being discovered. So even though the majority of the blame fell on the police, sadly, the DNA evidence and the fingerprints, which were Gary's and not anyone else's, could not be used as evidence in court, which was devastating to the investigation. But with all of this new information, Gary, who is currently on parole for almost taking the life of a woman in 2002, he was arrested and charged with Nona's murder. Gary was a very violent man. He had a history of being forceful with women. In 2002, he attacked a woman who was out for a run. He subdued her, even told her that he would end her life if she resisted. Luckily, the woman managed to escape and ran to her car and called the police. Gary was arrested shortly thereafter and was given just 19 months in prison. At the trial for Nona's murder, which began in April of 2010, Gary's wife testified against him. According to her, he was a dangerous and aggressive man, and she was nothing more than his punching bag. Gary's wife also came forward with an eerie but condemning detail. See, a few weeks before Nona's tragic passing, she caught him spying on Nona through her window. This was news for the prosecution because it reeked of premeditation. Even though we don't know why Gary attacked Nona, the attack was not random. Gary had deliberately chosen Nona as his next victim of abuse and violence, and that decision ended with Nona losing her life. So this was what the prosecution believed happened on December 15th. Since Gary and Nona lived in the same building, he knocked on her door, and Nona let him in for some reason. Either he was pretending to ask for help, or there was some other reason, we just don't know. Regardless, he almost immediately overpowered Nona in her bedroom, where he used the lamp on her and tragically ended her life, among other things. But the craziest part of this whole thing is that Gary's defense team continued to blame Kevin and stuck to the whole boyfriend caught girlfriend cheating story. Because Gary's fingerprints and DNA couldn't be used as evidence, the trial was declared as a mistrial because the jury could not come to a decision. This only meant one thing. A new trial was booked, and this time one of Gary's victims, the woman that he attacked in 2002, also testified. But sadly, this didn't make a difference either, and the jury still could not come to a decision. It's just devastating to know that the investigators had the evidence in their possession, but because of simple degradation, it was unusable. I can't imagine a more heartbreaking feeling for Nona's family. Gary Dunn, the person clearly responsible for Nona's attack and subsequent passing, was allowed to walk free, all because the investigators failed to do their job in the beginning stages of the investigation. But it wasn't long until 39-year-old Gary was arrested again in 2018 for committing 2 more crimes in one day. The first one was an attempted and fortunately unsuccessful kidnapping of a woman, and the second was inappropriate public behavior in front of another woman. The police were immediately called, and given his violent history, Gary was finally convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. This case was just so tragic. Not only did Nona lose her life, but the wrongdoer got away with it again and again. Even though Gary is in prison, he isn't there because he ended Nona's life. In fact, technically speaking, Nona's case is still unsolved, even though the police know exactly who did it. Nona was only 19 and had so many plans for herself. She wanted to be a music school teacher, and she had her whole life ahead of her. Having gone through so much trauma and pain, Nona didn't deserve to have her life ended so brutally and senselessly. Her family and friends missed the beautiful and caring young woman every single day, and we can only hope that the investigators find incriminating evidence to finally convict Gary of Nona's murder so that the Dirksmeyer family can finally have some sort of closure and move on with their lives one day. As for Kevin, he not only lost his girlfriend that fateful day, but also his entire future. And to find out that his girlfriend of 5 years had also been stepping out on him behind his back, well, it only made things so much worse. In light of this monumental event, Kevin decided to change paths and he studied law. He eventually became a lawyer in 2011, and he also sued 2 police officers who wrongfully accused him, but unfortunately that lawsuit didn't go anywhere. In the end, Nona lost her life for reasons unknown. Kevin too lost the life that he thought he had, and for what? Well, unfortunately, that's a question that will likely never be answered. But Kevin has dedicated his life to studying and practicing law, promising to never let such a massive miscarriage of justice ever take place again. But unfortunately for Nona, her family, and all of those close to her, the damage has already been done. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Mike Poole and KitKat-B83. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public, and it's currently the best way you can help support the channel. I really appreciate all of you guys that have decided to do that. So if you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video or find the link down in the description. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free, just keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.